Dobar dan. Good morning to everyone. We will soon start our first panel entitled Rethinking Regional Cooperation. My name is Suzana Grubješić and I will be moderating this panel. So it is my honor and pleasure to call our distinguished guests, panelists, to join me here. First of all, Professor Snežana Bogosavljević-Bošković, Minister of Agriculture and Protection of the Environment in the government of Republic of Serbia. Gospodin Branimir Gvozdenović, Ministar održivog razvoja i turizma iz Vlade Republike Crne Gore. Minister Lefter Koka, Minister of Environment in the government of the Republic of Albania. And Mr. Kees van der Rey, our guest from Geneva, from International Labour Organization, who is coordinator of the Global Green Jobs Program.
We can start. I'm going to try to respect the time that has been set in the agenda, because our guests also have their commitments. You know what it's like with the executive branch. The ministers have to work at several places. They cannot dedicate all of their time to one conference. So far, we've already heard that the timing of this conference is excellent right now, that the summit G20 of the most important, richest countries in the world has just finished, and climate changes were one of the key topics apart from economy situation, economy battle against Ebola, and a historical agreement was reached between the US and China on the reduction of CO2 emissions, and the European Union also committed to something like that. And definitely there isn't a better moment to have a discussion like this on the topic of climate changes and the green economy. As Professor Jeffrey Sachs said in his book, The Age of Sustainable Development, and the world premiere of this we had yesterday in Belgrade, climate changes remind us of a frog boiling slowly in cold water. If you boil it that way, it's not going to jump out of the pot, but at the end, it will cook alive. So when we have all of this in mind, as well as the fact that we were also witnesses of climate changes that have been happening and are still happening in our region of southeastern Europe, we're asking the question how ready our region is to actively participate in these global processes, and how much are we preparing for what is going to happen next year, and that is the new global agreement on climate changes, the so-called Kyoto 2, and moreover, how prepared we are to adapt to the consequences of climate changes, to recognize our own vulnerability and estimate what's best in our interest and what we can do. The second global process where our region should participate is sustainable development and realizing these ambitious universal goals that establish the equilibrium between the economic, social, ecological aspirations and thoughts. Because the goal of our region should be sustainable future, and each dialogue is a step further closer to the realization of this future. Sustainable development knows of no boundaries. All the countries in the region have similar problems. That is how to finally get out of the economic crisis, how to successfully complete the transition period with the smallest possible cost for the citizens of the regions. And one of the answers to this question is green economy, and turning towards the green economy is very demanding. We need a global partnership here of the public and the private sector involving the stakeholders, that is the government, the governments, the scientific community, international organizations. And in this area, there are many studies, analyses that show that our region is behind other regions because of the general attitude that green economy is expensive, and also because, for example, objective circumstances exist that say that each country should individually approach the development of green economy, that they have to use their own capacity for development and their own perspective. And all of this and some other things will be the topic of our panel today, now, and later. And please now let's listen very carefully to our first speaker, that is Professor Snežana Bogosavljević-Bošković, Minister of Agriculture and Protection of Environment in Serbia. Dear ministers, distinguished excellencies, representatives of the scientific and expert public, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure that Belgrade is the host of this conference that gathers such a large number of most eminent experts and economists in the area of economy and climate change. And it is my honor to greet you on behalf of the government of Serbia and the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment, and to wish everybody successful work, and to our dear friends from abroad, a pleasant stay in our country. As we know, the problem of climate change is one of the biggest problems of modern civilization, and the solving of this problem remains an inevitable part of international, regional, and national agendas. The latest reports of the International Panel on Climate Changes clearly defines the causes and effects, and also possible scenarios of the future development. Which one of these scenarios will be our future depends exclusively on our vision and our preparedness to act immediately, but also the responsibility towards future generations. I remind you that in the period between the 1st and the 12th December in Peru, there will be a conference of the United Nations on climate changes in Lima. This conference, this kind of conference is held every year, and very important decisions are adopted at these conferences regarding the UNFCCC. The next conference will be held next year in Paris, where an agreement is supposed to be adopted about obligations for the period after 2020. It is well known that the EU gives great importance to climate changes, and on several occasions they stated their expectations that the Republic of Serbia should present their commitments on how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2020 or 2030. When we're talking about our country, in the process of identification of the quantity of damaging emitting gases, it's possible to reduce the gases for the period after 2020. Our goal is to our commitments sent to the Secretariat for Conventions by March next year. However, I would like to point out that establishing the possibility to reduce emissions is a very sensitive issue, especially from the aspect of the stability of the energy system of our country. As far as we know, other countries that are candidate countries for the EU are not ready yet to take over the commitment to reduce emissions of damaging gases before they become fully fledged members of the European Union. It is up to us in the following conferences in Lima, in Peru, to set a more responsible path, and I believe that this path depends on all of us. And I believe that it will be determined by our responses to the challenges of climate changes. The challenge that evidently affects all the spheres of our lives. At the same time, the challenge of fighting against the climate changes and adapting to the changed climate conditions presents a big development opportunity. An opportunity for radical social and economic changes and introduction of innovating solutions, that is, finding new alternative strategies of socioeconomic development. Green economy represents a means that will comprise all of these strategic possibilities, but also practical ways of realizing them. Ladies and gentlemen, recognizing the magnitude of this problem and the importance of fighting the climate changes, the Republic of Serbia and the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment are investing huge efforts to promote green economy and at least a part of this problem try to solve it at the national level. I believe that the model of green economy can ensure an economic growth, create new jobs, reduce poverty, ensure sustainable usage of natural resources, and increase the level of competitiveness of Serbian economy. And for these reasons, recently, at the initiative of the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment, and in cooperation with the Ministry of Economy and the Chamber of Commerce of Serbia, we formed an intersectoral working group for the improvement of the framework for the development of green economy. The nationally accepted commitments of trying to use the renewable sources of energy more than before and improving agricultural practice in waste management in order to protect biodiversity. All of this initiated the green path of the Serbian development. All of this was recognized through national strategic documents, such as the strategy of the development of energy till 2025, forestry strategy, strategy how to develop biodiversity, a strategy of agricultural and rural development until 2024. Moreover, a strategy on the combat against climate changes with the action plan that we are working on intensively right now will have an important role in the identification of the path that will be followed by the reduction of greenhouse gas effects. The promotion and usage of green technologies will definitely be one of the key elements of this strategy. I believe that this development path will reduce the sensitivity of the sector to destructive impacts of climate changes, that is, natural disasters, and at the same time reduce the damage that they incur. Incentives to the investments in this way are our priority. By recognizing the importance of the cooperation between the private and public sector, the partnership with all interest groups, as well as the NGOs and so on, as well as the cooperation at the regional and international level, I believe that this conference that includes two key topics of the modern day, that is both climate and green economy, it presents one of the important steps on the way to fulfill our joint vision. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. A regional ministerial conference on sustainable development was held in Budva. I participated there. So, Minister, could you please tell me if I'm right when I say that one of the two most important projects implemented by your ministries are the legalization of illegal buildings and also the development of the coastal area. So anyhow, Minister, you have the floor now. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to share our experiences and present our expectations, and to make suggestions to ourselves and others as to what should be done. A couple of weeks ago, a conference was held in Budva. It is not easy to work in Budva because there are a lot of opportunities for sustainable development, but and I think that the conclusions that we arrived at in Budva were very good. I have an opportunity to attend different conferences very often, and that the conclusions are always very good, but I'm not sure whether we work to implement them. I believe that we know what needs to be done, but as we've heard from the introductory speakers, the question is how the actions should be taken, how the things should be implemented. We need to reach an agreement. We need to reach a consensus. We need to make efforts. And it seems to me that, have I done something wrong? No? Well, we need to focus on these things. We've heard some serious warnings, as Mr. Jeffrey Sachs said, that in 30 years' time we may fall off the cliff. And on the other hand, we keep delaying action. And now we are setting the criteria as to what needs to be done. We talked about, we are saying that the CO2 emissions should be reduced by 30%. It used to be 20%, but very soon it will be 50% plus. And then we keep postponing the deadlines. It was 2015, then 2020, and now we're talking about 2030. So serious changes are taking place globally, and they can be seen by the naked eye. I asked people who are older than me if these changes were evident in the past period. They said no, that they've become evident over the past 20 or so years. Well, the small countries, we expect from the big and powerful countries to come to an agreement, and they expect our small countries to follow their suit. And I'm very happy for the opportunity to host the Budva conference. I would also like to congratulate you for this conference, for a very good link between the global, regional and national that we have at this conference. And also, we can see that the attendees at this conference are predominantly young people, whereas in the past they were mostly the older people. So I think that now the youth, they're taking the things under the control. Well, to answer your question, every national policy has to have specific projects if that policy is to make a contribution. However, the global players need to define their technology strategies. In the absence of technology strategies, the small countries can hardly achieve anything, especially the countries and the regions with low GDPs. So the big countries have to make the key efforts and to develop technologies, high-profile technologies that we then will import, and these technologies will ensure sustainable development of small countries. In Montenegro, we defined about a dozen projects that need to be implemented. Being a coordinator of the sustainable development and tourism, so we actually managed to fit the tourism sector in the sustainable development elements. So we tried to follow the global trends, and tourism has made a progress of more than 5% globally, and in Montenegro that percentage is around 15%. We have special programs for ecotourism in national parks, and I believe we have a good strategy for protected areas, and around 25% of Montenegrin territory has a certain level of protection, and level 1 protection is accorded to nearly 10% of the Montenegrin territory. They are namely national parks, and this is in line with our aspirations for Montenegro to become an ecological country, and it is enshrined in our constitution as well. And this is a very specific measure of the sustainability project, and we owe gratitude to international organizations for helping us how to ensure our identity and ensure benefits for the society as a whole and encourage sustainable entrepreneurship in that area. The second point that you've mentioned and that was extensively discussed in Budva is regulatory project. So that is something that should actually help open green jobs with the assistance of the international funds. Some 20 years ago in the southeastern Europe, there were a lot of illegal buildings in Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Albania, Macedonia, Kosovo, Turkey, Greece, across the region. And there are several models how this can be approached. You can either ignore the situation, and you do best when you do that, it seems so. The other is to actually initiate the process of legalizing the situation in the field. And the third thing you can do is to try to change the situation. And that is what we want to do. We don't think that the situation or that phenomenon should be ignored. Then I don't think that we should simply legalize the situation in the field, because thereby you're legalizing something that is not good, that is not energy efficient, that has very low energy consumption level, and which is simply not sustainable from the perspective of the utility system. So we've been working on this project for quite some time, and we had experts from Canada, Australia, and the region helping us with this project. And we believe that the main form of the buildings should be maintained, whereas the facades should be changed, and we need to build new streets and to roll out new, to actually rebuild the new sewage systems. So where can we find the funds to do this? Well, we could actually collect the arrears from the people who actually have not been paying their dues, because I don't think that these funds that are collected should be used to pay out salaries or day-to-day spending. So if every of you here has a building, you need to pay certain fees and charges for that, and that is in your interest as well, because if a square meter of your building is worth like 1,000 euros, the value of your building will increase, and if you pay your fees and charges regularly, thereby making it possible for new investments to be made. And the international financial institutions have expressed interest to support this project. We believe that this project fully reflects the sustainability issues and everything that is related to green economy and sustainable development. I think that these are our key problems, because very often we know what needs to be done, but there are no specific projects. But these projects that I've briefly described here are good examples how we can move from words to deeds. And I think that it is key to the sustainable development. I think that it is very important to have specific projects, so that the governments who we do not have enough funds in our state budget, but and that therefore we need the assistance of international organizations. Therefore, I want to send an invitation to international financial institutions and others to support specific projects that can serve as a model. Otherwise, we won't achieve much. The messages you're trying to get across are good, but in the absence of good projects, we won't achieve much. Another project that we are currently developing in Montenegro is actually intended to assume commitments to implement certain policies. And what is the key in the region when it comes to the implementation of the project? That is the lack of technical documentation. Spatial plans or physical plans, they are binding, and building permits are issued based on spatial plans. And we plan to adopt a new law in 2015, and under this draft law, in addition to the environment impact assessment, another analysis will have to be made, and that is the assessment of climate change. So when you adopt a spatial plan of the city of Belgrade, or the spatial plan of the industrial zone in Podgorica, you will know exactly what, either positive or negative climate changes it will induce. Because at a later stage, people will be getting building permits for the buildings that will be energy efficient, be they residential buildings or industrial buildings. So, and that is how I see the direct policy implementation. And this is how we actually move from the global policy to the regional, local level policy. So when you get a building permit, it will specify all the conditions that you have to meet concerning the sustainable development. And otherwise, my suggestion is that all ministers, all environment ministers should think carefully about this, and that they should support only the documents that have this climate change elements incorporated in them. Well, my job is a little bit easier because the ministry that I had has a very good team working on spatial plans and zoning plans. And well, I hope I'm not taking too much of your time, but the third point I want to make is that we are extensively working on how to protect the environment in a better way, and at the same time, we are working to actually open new jobs and in tourism sector primarily, and how to ensure better treatment or preferential treatment to hotels and other tourist facilities. Then also there is the issue of municipal waste, and we don't have much to show off about here in the region. This is a serious problem for Montenegro, and because Montenegro is actually basing its development on tourism, on a sustainable tourism that presents a specific identity of Montenegro that is related to the close vicinity of lakes, mountains, the sea, and other natural areas. Thank you. Thank you once again for the opportunity to speak at this conference.
Zahvaljujem se puno, ministre Gvozdenović. Our next
Thank you, Minister Gvozdenović.
Of Albanian government, Mr. Lefter Koka, please make your statement.
Honorable ministers, distinguished organizers and hosts of this conference, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jeremić, it is a particular honor to address this conference on the climate change and the green economy. Two essential issues that will be the core of our deliberations here in Belgrade. Organized in the context of the UN post-2015 development agenda, we appreciate the fact that the conference seeks to raise awareness among both decision makers and public opinion towards sustainable development in separately integrating climate change. Earlier this month, I had the pleasure to participate at the Regional Ministerial Conference on Sustainable Development in Budva, Montenegro, and in less than 2 weeks, I arrive in Belgrade to participate at the conference to exchange views on climate change and green economy. Last October, with colleagues from all over the world, we attended the high-level segment of the 12th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biodiversity in Pyongyang, focusing on biodiversity for sustainable development. So I make mention of these activities to once again show that sustainable development is without a doubt the priority and the center of attention of global decision-making as the vision that intertwines immediate and long-term objectives, local and global activities, social, economic, and environmental aspects as inseparable and interrelated components of human progress. Negative climate trends, such as temperature rising and frequency increase in extreme natural phenomena, such as floods, heat waves, or forest fires, have unfortunately set the stage for inflicting consequences, especially for the most vulnerable and financially unfortunate social strata. In this sense, efforts to integrate climate change issues into all sectors of policy making, development of efficient policies that enable implementation of measures that reduce risks and promote resiliency remain at the heart of our attention and action. Sustainable use of natural resources and promotion of green economy are demonstrated as the solution to tackle global and regional challenges in front of us. In the framework of the EU integrations in June 2014, Albania can count a series of environmental landmarks, especially in transposition of European legislation into the national one. The National Plan for the EU integration 2014 to 2020 sets clear targets for transposition of EU climate and energy package. This will, in turn, consolidate the grounds for Albania's sustainable development path. Albania, that plans to develop towards green economy, has supported the United Nations climate change conventions and has committed to take the following measures. I'm talking about specific national measures to determine the national intended contribution for emission reduction until 2020, to increase renewable energy resources to 35% until 2020, and to increase energy efficiency to 9% until 2018. The Albanian Ministry of Environment, in cooperation with close partners such as the EU, the World Bank, GIZ, UNDP, UNEP, and other institutions and donors, is currently implementing a number of climate change-relating projects which seek to promote green economy. As part of the UNFCCC obligations, Albania has submitted the first and the second national communication documents, and the third national communication is in its final preparation stage, calling for increased cooperation among all sectors: energy, agriculture, forestry, waste management, transport, and others. The market transformation and the use of solar panels is attempting to promote solar energy as a powerful renewable energy resource in Albania through minimization of implementation obstacles and cost reduction. Carbon reduction in Southeast Europe, in line with the EU membership requirements, is related to the development of the lower carbon strategies. Also the establishing a network of information exchange methodologies, experiences, and best national and regional practices. With a considerable hydropower potential, of which only 33% is exploited, supported by the EU and the World Bank, we are elaborating the regulatory and institutional framework for water administration, orienting it towards integrated water resources management. Energy remains a strategic sector for any economy. Thus, transposition of the EU energy and climate change package and investments in renewable energy resources constitute an especially high priority in the agenda of Albanian policies. 90% of national energy production comes from hydropower plants, and Albania intends to increase energy production from hydro resources through increasing adequate investments in the sector. However, studies show that 20% decrease in rainfall until 2015 will lead to a 15% reduction of energy production from bigger hydropower plants and 20% from smaller ones. In view of this, reliance on hydropower energy only remains a challenge for us. The National Energy Strategy highlights the need to diversify and increase energy production through upgrading national assets using new technologies, increasing energy efficiency, promoting eco-building and other energy renewable sources, such as solar, wind, and biomass, and others. Albania has a considerable potential in solar energy with 24 to 280 sunny days per year. Various national and foreign companies have come up with concrete projects for energy production from either solar or wind resources. However, this remains an underexploited area. In all of our efforts of sustainable development and green economy, the public-private partnership remains high in our priority and crucial for implementation and deliverance of good projects as a guarantee for energy and economic development. I would like to wish you successful work at this conference and wish fruitful results in outlining post-2015 development agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Koka. Our next speaker is Mr. Kees van der Rey. He is coordinator of the Global Greens program of the International Labour Organization from Geneva. Please make your statement.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Moderator, and thank you so much, organizers, Mr. Jeremic in particular, and the other people behind the CIRSD, as well as the government of Serbia to make this event possible. And thank you also, Excellencies. I find myself in a very distinguished company today at the panel. I always also feel a little bit the odd one out, not just because I am not yet a minister, but also because with environment, agriculture, and sustainable development, there are no representatives of what we call the social dimension of the sustainable development agenda. In particular, we have not heard yet about the employment potential, but also the challenges in the transition to a green economy. We are hoping, we are believing that there is a lot of potential for growth and employment, as the conference has already announced as well and underlined, in the transition to a green economy. But to see the linkages between employment and social inclusion on the one hand, with environmental policies and decarbonization on the other, is still quite an uncharted territory, and therefore I'm very happy and pleased to give you a few points of reflection from that team. So why the ILO, the International Labour Organization? We are indeed looking at employment and social inclusion, social protection. We also happen to be a tripartite United Nations organization with workers and employers in our governing body. And therefore we feel we are, if you like, better connected to the real economy, to what really works on the ground. And we hope to be, for that matter, very practical in our advice and assistance as well. So then why green jobs and why me here today? Well, personally, just for a side note, if I may, I am Dutch from nationality. I was born in the Netherlands, about 6 meters under the average water level in Rotterdam. If some of you may know that city, it is the port of our country and a global port as well. I was born in the middle of the last century, just years after an enormous flood hit our country, killing more than 2,000 people and many animals, in a time that we didn't yet talk about unprecedented floods and storms. These were just natural disasters as they come periodically. But that event has created actually an enormous industry of infrastructure defense works on dikes, of tunnels, of ramps, of all kinds of innovations in civil engineering, up to the point that this is now one of our major export sectors as well. So if you like, on the one hand, me being from the Netherlands, this link between natural resources, environment, and our livelihoods is almost embedded in our genes. We're born with it. And indeed, if you look at the maps of the IPCC, predicted in the time that the climate will have warmed and sea levels will have risen, a large, if not all of our country, will be underwater. And that, of course, is of big concern to my country. But away from my country, the International Labour Organization has coined something called green jobs that indeed epitomizes this link between not just the impact, thank you, or the implications of going green, of green growth, of sustainable development for the labour market and how we have to respond to that, but also seeing labour, employment, entrepreneurship as a source of change, as a driver of change, as a source of innovation. Sometimes we call it investing in human capital, investing in people. I think Professor Sachs led a project, Millennium Project, years ago after the MDGs had been adopted, precisely pointing to that aspect, capacity building, understanding, and being able to manage changes, but also at more practical levels in terms of skills for greener occupations and entrepreneurship, particularly on the young people who are looking for jobs, new jobs, and maybe more prone, more keen, more interested in going green from the start. So we've been looking at this employment implication, and we've seen that if the right policies would be in place, globally up to 60 million extra jobs could be created in the transition. And why so many? Because many of the promising sectors, and we've heard a lot of that just now, I'm not going to repeat them all, have higher labor intensities and higher indirect linkages throughout the economy. We call them indirect and induced effects on other employment areas in the economy, in particular in renewable energy, in agriculture, in tourism, and in particular also in construction. Some numbers, just for the sake of illustrating what we're talking about. Nearby France could have 300,000 jobs related to renewable energies. Hungary, if a deep retrofitting program would be undertaken in older buildings to make them indeed more energy efficient, I think that was the second prong of Dr. Sachs, Professor Sachs' three-point agenda, up to 184,000 extra jobs could be created. In Europe as a whole, more than 14 million jobs have already been generating in biodiversity conservation, management and restoring natural resources. And in particular, in the face of the effects of the floods, in the effects of weather patterns changing, we believe that that area, natural resource management, building back better, building back more sustainably after disasters have struck and preventing new floods and new droughts could generate tremendous amount of new jobs as well. And my final sector, my favorite sector, if you like, because I think it is of high importance to the region, I've heard talking about it this morning already, is waste management and recycling. Not a huge creator of new jobs. We estimate 560,000 could be created by 2025 if recycling rates in Europe would go up to 60, 75%. Still too low for many. And just not because waste management is indeed important in terms of reducing pollution and somehow also emissions, but also because it is a hazardous occupation. It is an occupation for many people of last resort, also in your country, in Serbia and in others. And if there's one thing which we could all start doing, in particular on regional level, is trying to connect waste collecting systems and put recycling facilities, recycling systems in place, upgrading the working conditions, formalizing the working conditions and the working patterns of the people involved. Now there's a lot of informal workers, informal economy workers, which are prone to abuse and health hazards, and making this system really work for all, for environment and for livelihoods. So that is one concrete suggestion I would make as a follow-up to our very theoretical and intentional contributions indeed to different agendas. With your permission, one more point perhaps to conclude. If there are opportunities both in creating new jobs and improving the existing environmental jobs to make them more decent, such as in waste management, but also in other sectors, there is another big challenge and opportunity to really make enterprises greener, both in terms of producing new green products and services, such as recycled products, cups to drink from, or other products in the economy, of course, solar panels, etc., but in particular to be greening their own business operations. And here I'm looking again at my second neighbor, the hotel and restaurant industry, the catering industry. A lot of gains can directly be made by reducing inefficiencies in energy, in water management, in the food value chain. How much food we waste? Isn't it 40% between farm and fork globally? Between harvesting, post-harvest losses, transportation, and rotting away in supermarkets up to our kitchens. So if hotel and industry and restaurants could immediately improve efficiencies, gains are going immediately to, of course, the management, but also the operators, the workers who have to learn these smarter ways of working. And by incentivizing these workers, showing the benefits of that for clients, for their own incomes, we believe we can move ahead. All that together calls for what we call a just transition framework. What does a just transition framework mean? A transition is there. A transition is moving ahead. And I think if now governments are pushing it more and more, I believe the private sector overall is becoming more and more of a key driver. And we'll hear this afternoon from our colleagues from private sector organizations how that actually is happening. I do believe it is happening more and more. It may actually overtake public policies as the main driver of greening. But we need to stick together. There needs to be partnership and dialogue and understanding. And this is the green just transition framework. This is making this transition work for enterprises, for workers, for people who are affected by floods, who may lose their livelihoods temporarily perhaps, and have to be relocated, reskilled, may have to move to new jobs, particularly from carbon-intensive industries to new, greener jobs. And we need skill systems and employment information services. We need mobility incentives, and we need to educate young people already from an early age. So if a just transition policy framework is something the ILO is trying to promote, we want to do that together with our other United Nations agencies. And I'm happy that the Solutions Network is also hosting together with the CIRSD this event. We do work with sharing solutions and sharing knowledge with many of our United Nations partners. We have coined something called the Partnership for Action on Green Economy page with UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNIDO, Industry Development, UNDP, and UNITAR on training, which help precisely to carve these pathways to a greener economy, to see where the change can be made, where the opportunities are, and to direct investments to those areas and help making the economy there come about inclusively. So if that is a program, what is on offer is analysis, and I think some of you mentioned there's a need for analysis, understanding what's on the cards, and then negotiate with them. And for me, that means what is the employment impact of those national intentional commitments? No? What does it do to your jobs and your job market and the quality if you commit to reducing emissions? So we can help you analyzing that and make the offer better. We can also share more knowledge. We can do piloting. I think the projects piloting you mentioned just before, Mr. Minister, are very key. We'll have to learn from small experience and then upscale. It's not having dozens of pilot projects at the same time. It's just having 2 or 3 that work and then scale up. And this is what the partnership page can offer, and the ILO can offer to this agenda, to each of you in your countries, and to the group at the regional level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Samo želim da vas obavestim da naša ministarka mora da krene, ima prethodno zakazane obaveze, pa izvinite za trenutak.
Our minister has to leave due to some previous commitments, so I have to tell you that she's leaving. Before we continue our panel, I would like to ask the ambassador of France, Christine Roth, to speak to us, because next year this big conference will be held in Paris, where an agreement will be reached on climate changes in global warming. And as France is a host and you are our dear guest here, please, will you speak to us?
Is it working? Thank you very much to give me the floor, ministers, distinguished guests. As it was said several times during this morning, we are all focused on the preparation of the Lima conference, which is going to take place in a few days, and after that, the preparation of the COP21 conference in Paris next year. We are optimistic about this Paris conference because we have no choice, as it was said during all this morning. The stakes are rising, but also the consciousness of everyone and of the public opinions, and it's a very important element also in the recent positive decisions which have been taken and which have been referred to this morning. I'd like to congratulate the CIRSD for the timely organization of this conference, which I think it's very important that it takes place here in Belgrade. Also because it gives to the Serbian public the opportunity to hear views on these problems and to raise their own awareness. There are 2-3 ideas I'd like to convey. One is that everybody can do something. It's not true when people have the impression that the problem is so global that there is nothing to do. No, things can be done at the level of everyone, even in the everyday life. And it's very important that those ideas are shared by not only national authorities, but also local authorities, educational authorities, and the civil society, of course. The second very important idea is to struggle against the idea that there is a contradiction between sustainable development and economic growth. No, it's perfectly possible to have economic growth based on sustainable development, and also when we are in a region in which there is a lot of work to do in modernization, it's even an opportunity to use the new technologies to make a leap forward towards sustainable development, and I'm sure that the discussions you will have this afternoon will also show you that. And the third point I like to raise is the importance of the regional cooperation. I'm glad to see here representatives of other countries of the region. I'm glad to hear that work has been initiated and is developing. And we can imagine, as there are no boundaries in the problematic of climate change, let's imagine how it is at regional level. And it's very important that people realize that global problem is also a local problem. And thank you very much once again for the CIRSD for organizing this conference, which will be, I'm sure, very useful to convey those ideas towards the Serbian public.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Madam Ambassadors. Our dear guest in Belgrade is also Professor Vusal Gasimli, who is Chief of the Department of the Economic Analysis and Global Affairs of the Center for Strategic Studies from Baku, Azerbaijan. So please have the floor. The mic is there. Thank you.
His Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me, on behalf of the Center for Strategic Studies and the President of Azerbaijan, to extend our gratitude to our impressive partner from Serbia, Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development and Sustainable Development Solutions Network. As regards topic, I think this is a time to shift from conventional economic growth to green economic growth, because conventional economic growth remembers sand glass. The higher growth means a higher depletion of resources. Green growth likes the Higgs field, which converts energy to mass. Let me just give one example. Excessive use of energy is not the only way to make people happy. So the world's happiest people aren't in Singapore, Japan, or Switzerland, the richest countries by most measures, by in Guatemala, one of the poorest countries in the world. For example, electric power consumption in Guatemala was about 500 kilowatt-hour per capita, while the same indicator was about 8,000 kilowatt-hour per capita in Singapore. We are stealing the future, selling it in present and calling it GDP. According to the International Monetary Fund, fossil fuel subsidies around the world amounts to $1.9 trillion a year. Removing these subsidies could lead to a 13% decline in carbon dioxide emissions and generate positive spillover effects by reducing global energy demand. 0.5 billion out of this amount is subsidies for petroleum products, electricity, natural gas, and coal, while the other 1.4 trillion is the effects of energy consumption on global warming, public health, traffic congestion, road damage. My country is a hydrocarbon-rich country, Azerbaijan, but Azerbaijan now provides environmentally adjusted economic policy, and our energy efficiency policy, energy reforms, is pro-poor growth, and that's why let me introduce our suggestion for Sustainable Development Solutions Network and Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development, using this opportunity of the participation of His Excellencies Mr. Vuk Jeremić and Professor Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University to organize next meeting in Baku, in Azerbaijan, because as Professor mentioned, it is very difficult to convince resource-rich countries to shift from conventional one to green growth. That's why I think compiling meeting, international conference entitled Environmentally Adjusted Economic Growth from the perspective of hydrocarbon-rich countries would be very efficient before the Paris meeting at the end of this next year. Thanks in advance. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Professor Gasimli. I'm sure that we will take your proposal into serious consideration. Thank you very much for coming to Belgrade. So let me just exploit the presence of Mr. Van der Rey here and to ask him what is important for our region, which is every country has huge problems with unemployment, and every country has some difficulties in accepting that the green economy is not a luxury, it's a necessity. So what is actually needed to boost the green growth? What should we do here? What measures should we take apart from strategic plans and more strategic plans? What concretely is needed to boost the green growth here in the region of Southeastern Europe?
Thank you. That is a little bit the $10 million question with your understanding. I don't think I have that answer, honestly. It is a mega issue, and I can just point to perhaps a couple of issues. As I said before, mobilizing the private sector, mobilizing investments towards this agenda, and showing the opportunities for growth in terms of turnover, but also growth in terms of employment, quality jobs, decent jobs, I think is very important. So an enabling framework for business development, for investment, with a particular eye for small and medium-sized enterprises, because they often have either the lack of information or the lack of time and lack of manpower and women power to really go for those opportunities and develop business plans and negotiate them with the financial sector. I think that is one element. The other is to discuss with representatives of workers, of employers, of civil societies organizations, cooperatives possibly, but also informal economy operators who may be organized in all kinds of different groups, how they at their level can move. I think you need to create a groundswell. It cannot be a champion's agenda just there. It cannot be your president or vice president or minister who may go in a while. We need to create a mass movement, and that has to do with changing cultures, changing understanding, and doing things together. And for that matter, I think a lot can be done in social marketing, with the social media, but also in traditional publicity means, as well as in schools, early education, secondary education, and I mentioned that before in vocational training institutions, tertiary educations, architects, being brought to greener buildings ideas, city planners, city engineers, being shown what smarter cities look like, etc. So an overhaul actually of your education and training systems to the greener side of the development agenda, of your growth agenda. That may be two. And then three, for this to happen, and I said that before, and I'd like to really repeat it, I'm happy that some of this is happening. In interministerial, there has to be a connection between the silos of education, of environment, of employment, and of industry. We see too often that there is no coherence. There's actually often contradiction in an industry development policy on the one hand and a local economic or land management policy on another. There's no room for new industry, there's no room for green industry to get implanted, to get the frameworks and the support, because ministries of land, ministries of the infrastructure don't understand it, don't talk to the representatives. So you have in Serbia started, I believe, or was it another country where an interministerial coordination committee was established. We also talk about the vertical coherence need. It's not just between national ministers, but also national ministers with cities and with local governments, even communities. The coherence and the understanding of a green growth path is better understood.
We would like to give our opinion, something regarding opening new jobs. We heard that in Europe there's a large number we would like to hear what's a real green job, what are the criteria for a green job of a country. I believe that the economy, there's something happening, I'm sorry, but the microphone is not... I cannot hear him. I'm sorry. When these criteria are defined, and this should not be complicated, there already are certain experiences. The financial institutions that ask us to support a green project, they define certain lines where interest rates are very low or they are at the level of their source. And the second thing is that the states need to free these jobs from taxes and to ensure that the other expenses for each job are half as much as for other jobs. So only these three elements gave really good effects in certain countries. And I think that this is something that could work in our region as well and give good results. Also, there's a really important fact that we don't mention often enough, and that is who creates these policies. Are those the people from politics or people from the industry? The industry creates this. The politics is at the end, at the very bottom. And I'm inviting the people from the industry to help the people from politics to give their attitudes very clearly and work on these green projects and create conditions to make projects that can create conditions for green economy and green jobs. The economy supports this. The industry is still not sure about this, and it's a good opportunity in conferences like this to say that the highest responsibilities is on the experts from the industry. They work on plans, on projects, creating new technologies, and they suggest what's supposed to be done. So thank you.